This week, I am sharing my interview with Army retired Colonel David Fivecoat. David has a book coming out in July which discusses the leadership attribute grit. During the interview, we talked about leadership, dealing with adversity, and leading change. Please enjoy this special interview with David Fivecoat. Welcome to the Finance Leader Podcast, where leadership is bigger than the numbers. I am your host, Stephen McLean. This is the podcast for developing leaders in finance and accounting. I have an amazing guest this week on the podcast. I talked with Army retired Colonel David Fivecoat. Previously, Colonel Fivecoat served 24 years as an infantry officer. He led men and women during contingency operations in Kosovo and Bosnia, 3 combat tours in Iraq, and a combat tour commanding a battalion in Afghanistan. He culminated his service by overseeing the gender integration of the U.S. Army's Ranger School. David is also the managing partner of the Fivecoat Consulting Group. And he has a book coming out in July called Grow Your Grit, Overcome Obstacles, Thrive, and Accomplish Your Goals. During the interview, David shares his thoughts on leadership, leading change, overcoming adversity, and what he did that helped him have a successful career. So please enjoy this special interview with Army retired Colonel David Fivecoat. Today on the Finance Leader Podcast, I have a special guest, retired Army Colonel David Fivecoat, who had an amazing military career, is a triathlete, and started a consulting business last year at the start of the pandemic. Additionally, David has written a book called Grow Your Grit, Overcome Obstacles, Thrive, and Accomplish Your Goals, and it will be released in July. David, welcome to the Finance Leader Podcast.
Stephen, thanks for having me. I'm really excited about being on your podcast today.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And as most of my listeners know, I'm also a retired Army officer, and we're going to try not to use too much Army speak or acronyms or terminology. So if we do find ourselves doing that, we'll try to correct ourselves immediately.
Sounds good. Good ground rules.
All right. So please tell me, and please tell us about your background and why you joined the Army. You know, everyone who comes into the armed forces, to the military, we kind of all have different reasons for joining. So please tell us about your background and why you decided to join the Army.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So I grew up in Delaware, Ohio, which is right in the center of the state. And my family really didn't have a huge military background. My dad had been a teacher and then a manager at a warehouse. But I loved to read as a kid. We went to the Delaware County Public Library. I would check out as many books as I possibly could. And most of those books tended to be on World War II history. And as you know, most of the generals in World War II were from the Army, and most of them had attended West Point. And so I, fell in love with Eisenhower and Patton and Bradley and all those guys. And so the love for military history continued as I got older. And when it came time to apply to colleges, I applied to West Point. I got in early. And at that point in time, I decided I'm going to go to West Point and I'm going to try the Army. So went to West Point and actually continued my love affair with military history. I graduated with a degree in military history. Of course, as you would expect, I wrote my senior paper on World War II and the parachute jump into Sicily. Really enjoyed my time at West Point and made a lot of great friends there, and then went on out into the Army after that.
Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, I like that. I like your story. I want to ask you a couple of questions, particularly about leadership, because that is what the audience and the Finance Leader Podcast is really looking for. So give me some key lessons, especially about leadership, that you learned from your Army career.
Yeah. So I did 24 years in the Army. I was an infantry officer. I led platoons, companies, battalions, and then eventually a brigade. A platoon is about 40 people, a company is about 120, battalion about 670, and a brigade was about 3,000 soldiers. Throughout that time and reflecting on it, there's 2 sort of simple things that I take away from the Army that continue to influence me even today, and then one a little bit more complex. The first one is organization. The Army is sort of an organizational type of group. Every night, I still get out my little notebook and write down my list of things to do for the next day. I'm sure you carried around the green notebooks. I carried around the green notebooks in the Army.
Definitely.
I've transitioned to moleskins now in my post-Army life, but the organization was the big thing that I took away from the Army. Second thing was the importance of daily physical fitness. That still influences me to today. I got out this morning and rode my bike with a couple of friends. That influence that the Army had really had a big impact on me. The third one, which is a little bit more complex, is the idea of overcoming adversity. And throughout the 24 years in the Army, I did numerous things, from learning how to parachute from 1,000 feet and dealing with my fears there, making it through Ranger School and overcoming the adversity of the North Georgia mountains and the swamps in Florida. And then while I was out during my Army career, I deployed to Kosovo, which was a war-torn country right after a bombing campaign, and helped to try to put that country back together. I then went to Bosnia and did some peacekeeping and hunting for some war criminals, and learned how that you have to take a longer term approach to doing that. I did 3 deployments to Iraq. I did the invasion of Iraq, and then went back twice more for more counterinsurgency operations. And then I led a battalion in Afghanistan for over a year doing counterinsurgency operations down in southeast Afghanistan. Each of those sort of long-term challenges taught me how both myself and organizations overcome adversity and reach long-term goals. We'll talk more about that as we get into grit, but that was the third big takeaway that I took away from the Army.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. And I definitely have my daily to-do list, my checklist. I think I got checklists and calendars everywhere that I'm using constantly. Tell me about your transition from Army life to a civilian career and what challenges you overcame.
Yeah, so in 2017, after 24 years in the Army, I decided that it was time to transition to corporate America. And so for the folks that haven't been in the Army, it tends to be about a decision that you make about a year out. There's a lot of preparation involved in it. You've got to make sure all your personnel stuff is straight and your medical stuff is straight, and then you make the transition. And it was a big transition. I'd been in the Army as an institution for 28 years. I joke that I was institutionalized for 28 years, and there is an Army way of doing things that you and I are both comfortable with and would probably revert right back to if we had the chance. But corporate America is different. Community I live in, which is Columbus, Georgia, which is about an hour and a half south of Atlanta. It was the first time that I'd lived in a community. I've now lived out here for seven years. But this is the second longest I've lived anywhere. The town I grew up in, I lived for 18 years. I'm going to eventually come to a point where I've lived in Columbus, Georgia more than Delaware, Ohio. But that was a transition. I bought a house, another transition, became part of the community, joined some nonprofits to help out here in the community, and then also started a business. One of the big things that I see a lot of folks struggle with is identity. And I had an identity as a soldier. I had an identity as an officer, an infantry officer, and a whole bunch of things that I did on that side. But I realized that I had to change and evolve and continue to improve. And a couple big things that really helped me make that transition was to be able to shift identities and continue to be an athlete. So I took one thing from the Army and continued on. And so I raced triathlons, I've raced bike races, and I continue to, like we talked earlier, the daily physical fitness. And then I also worked really hard on being a dad. I've got she's now 11-year-old daughter, and that helped me transition my identity. And as I sort of got my footing as a business consultant and leadership trainer, those two things helped me transition the identity until I felt comfortable with this idea that, hey, I'm now an entrepreneur, I'm a small business owner, and I'm helping out companies get better with some of the things that I learned in the Army and some of the things that I've learned since the Army.
No, that sounds great. That's a great story. You highlight grit as a leadership attribute. Tell me what grit is and how we can apply it as we lead others.
Yeah. So for the audience out there that's listening, I want you to take a second and think about whatever you're most proud of as your long-term achievement It could be running a marathon. Could be going to grad school. It could be meeting a yearly sales goal, or even doing the numbers to make the annual report. Whatever it is, there was an immense amount of hard work that went into that. And so that hard work goes into achieving a long-term goal. I define grit as the will to persevere to achieve a long-term goal. And there's some subcomponents of that I think are critical in order to have that grit so you can actually reach that long-term goal. And I think the first thing is, personal purpose is incredibly powerful. Perseverance, that idea of being able to put one foot in front of the other and keep grinding it out. Resilience, the idea that, hey, I'm going to bounce back from the setback that happens along the way. You may get that bad grade in grad school, or the numbers don't work out. And then you've got to have some courage. And the way I define courage here is having the courage to manage your fear of failure. Because most of the time when you're trying to achieve this long-term goal, you're pushing yourself outside the comfort zone. It's not something easy to do, and you've got to work pretty hard to accomplish it. So having that, managing those fears and understanding, hey, I'm going to have some fears and doubts. Maybe you call it the imposter syndrome, whatever it is. For your folks, maybe it's when they make the leap to CFO, but they've got to manage that fear and understand that it's going to happen and it's going to be there. And then finally, their motivation. Where are you getting the motivation to continue to persevere and accomplish this long-term goal?
No, that's great. I believe that what you described, grit as this leadership attribute of overcoming, tough obstacles. I think it's something that the finance and accounting professionals can really use, especially when this group of people know the numbers and they have to show leadership and influence around the organization, particularly with senior leaders, and trying to apply what's really happening in the numbers to how it applies to the strategies the organization wants to achieve. And sometimes that's a little difficult. So that's why I really like and really grasped onto this concept of grit that you have.
Just like you're saying, it definitely takes, there's certain folks that can take it to that next level, that can take the numbers and then apply it to whatever challenge that they're having, and has that vision and ability to communicate numbers into strategy. There's a lot of companies out there that don't have that. And that's one of the interesting things that I've seen now post-Army is there's some really good companies out there that can do it. And there's some companies that are out there that are struggling with it.
No, I completely agree. I think that's why this is such a good concept. So taking that concept of grit, my next question takes me to an area of responsibility that you had when you were leading. And that is, you had that incredible opportunity to help lead the integration of women into Army Ranger School. Now, please describe how you had to lead change and had to overcome some cultural obstacles to ensure that this was done successfully.
Yeah. So for the audience that doesn't know what Ranger School is, the Ranger School is the United States Army's premier small unit leadership course. It's an incredibly gritty journey. It takes 61 days to actually make it through. Most Ranger students lose about 20 pounds because of the physical activity and limited food that they get. The Ranger students are averaging about 3 to 4 hours of sleep a night. And some folks have drawn the analogy that Ranger School is kind of the MBA program for the Army. It sets you apart. It gives you a little bit different skill set and experience, and it gives you some confidence. Even if you don't graduate, you still gain a little bit of confidence that you did something tough and you gave a shot at it. Ranger School has been in existence in the Army since 1952. In 2015, there had been about 77,000 male graduates, and there had been no women. The Army decided to do a pilot program to see how the gender integration of Ranger School would go, and I was tasked with the responsibility to lead that change. Classic organizational change challenge, but there was an enormous amount of resistance to change culturally from the Army. And a lot of it was expressed by folks that were retired. However, that same sentiment was actually carried by folks that were on active duty. We had 19 women come to the first day of Ranger School, and eventually 3 women earned their Ranger tab. The first 2 graduated in August, and the third graduated in October. all three women and the 19 women as well exhibited an incredible amount of grit as they persevered and earned the Ranger tab, which, as you know, Stephen, is a little black and gold piece of cloth that you get to wear on your uniform. But it is one of the things that does set you apart in the Army. A couple of things for your listeners that are thinking about leading organizational change. And in this instance, I think a couple of things that really helped us. First, we worked extremely hard to make sure it was a level playing field, that the school was going to treat every single student the exact same, whether they came from whatever walk of life, whatever experience, officer, enlisted, non-commissioned officer, and even we have some foreign students that attend every year. The second thing that was what helped us be successful was to have one standard. And so we actually had to go back to the Department of the Army and make sure that every standard was just the Ranger standard. And so it didn't matter if you were a man or a woman, you had to meet the exact same standards. And then the third thing that I think helped us out was it's better to do it with a group than an individual. From your time in the Army, you'll remember the principle of mass. And mass has some value. And the Army uses mass really to mean like number of troops or tanks or planes. But in this case, the fact that 19 women came in as a cohort and eventually 3 graduated was one of the things that helped make it successful. And so I encourage folks that are thinking about doing organizational change, rather than doing one-offs or two-offs, do it with a larger group. For instance, I don't know if you know this, but in 1947, during the integration of baseball, the person that everybody is familiar with is who broke the color barrier. Stephen, do you know?
Oh, it was Jackie Robinson.
Right. Jackie Robinson was the first black person to play Major League Baseball in 1947. But another 4 black men played baseball that year in the major leagues.
Right.
Their story doesn't come out as much because he was the glass ceiling breaker, and he was the focus. But the fact that 5 black men played in baseball was the same sort of idea that, hey, you need to have a group larger than just one if you're going to try to do some of this organizational change. The third thing, or the last thing that I'll say for folks that are leading organizational change, you're going to have people that resist change at all levels. And one of the things that my sergeant major and I did at the end of Ranger School was we went around and did town hall meetings 2 levels down at every part of the organization. And in retrospect, if I had to do it over again, I would do that town hall meeting 2 levels down at the beginning, the middle, and the end of any big organizational change piece that you're leading. And part of that is just to listen so you can hear the concerns of your team that's out there, on the front lines, dealing with some of the challenges and problems. So you can hear that, so that can influence you. And then it's also to make sure that you're putting out a consistent message, because sometimes your resistors to change are your direct reports. And so sometimes that message that you think is getting filtered down, especially when you're trying to lead incredibly large cultural change, it may not be making it down in the way that you think it would be. And so it takes a lot of extra time. We had to go around to 9 different sub organizations and talk to them. It took us quite a while to do that. But if I had to do it over again, I would do it at the beginning, the middle, and the end, because you want to make sure that those folks that are out there on the front lines that are dealing with this change have an opportunity to talk to you directly, and then you have the opportunity to make sure that you're putting out the message that you want to make sure it gets down to them.
No, that's a great rundown, because change is constant. Nothing stays static. We're going to have to deal with change constantly. I mean, you and I both had a long Army career, and we saw many different changes over those years, from the early 90s and all the way into, just a few years ago. And the Army continues to change today. And that's the same with any organization. And even our own country and our world, we're constantly dealing with change. And we're just going to have to, find a way to lead change, lead people who are resistant to that change. So thank you for that great rundown on how to leading change.
Yeah.
All right. And I want to get into some questions around learning leadership. Now, why do you think learning leadership would be important to a new or want to be a team manager in finance and accounting? where we normally would focus on becoming that technical expert and not really trying to lead or learn how to lead. And then also, what future impacts can learning leadership help with your career?
So let's start with a definition of leadership, and leadership is providing a purpose, a direction, and motivation into an organization towards some objective, something a little bit larger than yourself. I know you and I were both inculcated with this idea that everybody is a leader, and you want these folks to be thinking and being a leader, no matter what their role is, because you might have that good idea that actually solves a problem and prevents things going sideways. I do believe that everyone's a leader, even if you are the lowest accountant in an organization, because you've got to lead yourself. You've got to lead your kids or your family. You're going to be a leader in that team because you have some value within that team. And then you're also a leader in the community. Now, you can opt out to try to not be a leader in one of those realms, but I think everybody has some influence in whatever group that they're part of. You just have to acknowledge that you're going to be a leader. I think the most important thing out of being a leader is the impact that you can have on the people around you. I still get calls or texts or emails from people that I worked with, a decade ago that have gone on to continue to do great things. And, it gives you a sense of pride that, hey, I had a small influence on them. They picked up some tips and ideas and are maybe doing some, or maybe are not doing some things because of some things that I messed up. And so I feel that idea of having that impact on those people, and then also on the organization. Both of us have left the Army in our rearview mirror. The Army has not called me back at all, but I know that I had an impact on part of that organization for a good 2 decades. And so those things that provided me value, I think that, and I just think that the leadership piece of it, if you opt out of being a leader, you don't have that same impact. And to me, that's one of those things that drives me forward.
No, that's great. No, I completely agree with you. And especially around that everyone can be a leader. Anyone that comes up with an idea or a way to do something better, and even those finance and accounting professionals that are just individual contributors, you're working with numbers. Anytime you have a discussion with a senior leader or somebody that can have influence in the organization, and you're helping them achieve a decision or reach a conclusion to something, you are exhibiting leadership. So I completely agree.
One of the things that I talk to in my executive coaching side of things is I talk to folks about leading upwards. There's a bit of skill in leading your boss because, for instance, I'll give you an example in the Pentagon, which shocked me, but when I first got there, but now I think, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We would write emails for our boss, because the brigadier general that was our boss was so busy that he didn't have time to craft the emails. And when I first got there, I was like, oh man, he can't even write his own email. What the heck? But then after watching him operate in the Pentagon and the amount of demands on his time, I learned that, hey, if you can pre-write an email for the boss that they can just hit forward to the appropriate people, that'll open doors for you and make things happen and do all these things that you want. There's a skill to that, though, and there are some folks that never got it and weren't that good at it. But I'd like to think that after 2 years of writing emails for my boss, I got decent at it.
I completely agree. I did the same thing during my Pentagon tour. We all, the team that I served on, we were trying to do our very best for our immediate boss, and then his boss also, trying to set them up for all the different things, all the meetings that they were in all day, because they were in meetings like 80 to 90% of their day. So I completely agree.
Yeah. And the boss that runs from meeting to meeting to meeting, you can set them up for success to have an impact in that meeting, with a little bit of background information, and it makes your life so much easier. But
no, that's a great point about leading upwards. I like that. Thank you. So the next question that I want to ask you, and please help the finance and accounting professionals out there, because this is a question that comes up, is what do you think is the difference between successful leaders and unsuccessful ones? And what advice would you give new team managers to help them achieve long-term success?
Yeah. For the listeners out there, think about the worst boss that you've ever had. And everybody's had one. I can think of, I've got 3 right now on the tip of my tongue. But think about what they did or didn't do. And everybody, whether it was didn't treat people well or didn't manage their time well or whatever, it's easy to figure out what not to do. It's a lot harder. And we all have those leaders that we worked for that you go, hey, I'm never going to do X because that guy did it or that woman did it. And I hated that. And I have those things that I still do today. It's pretty tough to figure. It's pretty easy to figure out what not to do. It's a lot harder when you work for a great leader to figure out what they're doing that makes them so successful and makes you work as a follower. A couple of things that I would throw out for the new leaders out there. The infantry's motto is "Follow me," and this idea of leading by example is one of those things that successful leaders all have. You do your best to set the example that you want your team to do, and you model that behavior. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is the biggest decision that you have as a leader at any level is how you spend your time. And it's worth going back over your calendar for 2 weeks if you're a new leader and look at exactly where you're spending your time. And I would break it down by hour or half hour or even 15-minute increments. And you're going to be amazed at the amount of time that you're spending on email or in meetings. And you're not doing that development or walking around and talking to folks that really makes the impact on folks as leaders. And so reviewing where and how you're spending your time is an extremely big decision as a leader and can have a huge impact. And so between leading by example and reviewing how they spend their time, those are the 2 big things that I tell the new leaders to start off with.
No, that sounds great. One of the things that I try to encourage and advocate for is for even the individual contributors. They tend to each have certain metrics or responsibilities that they have, and go and lead and go partner with the expert out there that they have to work with, whether it be another department manager or another senior leader that owns that metric, and connect with them and work with them and how to deliver and understand that metric completely from step 1 to step 20, and being able to get out from what you're doing, your normal, daily grind, to get out there and partner with other people and get out and talk with people, and then exhibit that leadership. And I think that, of course, what you said is that difference between that successful and unsuccessful leader. You have written a book about grit, and please tell us about why you wrote it and who can benefit, and also where can we get it?
Yeah. So late last fall, I was talking with a client and we were discussing grit and how they could build grit in their organization. And Angela Duckworth is an incredible professor out of the University of Pennsylvania that's done a ton of research on grit. I've read her book, I started reading other folks' books on grit. And the one thing that I came away from all of the books was that they didn't really offer a real solid process to actually developing your grit. They spend a lot of time telling you what grit is. They measure it. They talk about folks that have a lot of it, but they don't talk to you about how to grow it. And I started thinking about my experiences in my careers, from triathlons to the Army to combat to parachuting. And I was like, hey, I might be able to offer something. And so I said, well, I'll try to test drive some of these ideas on my blog. And so I rolled out some of the ideas, and they really resonated with the group. And I buckled down and I wrote all winter, put together a book called Grow Your Grit. It's available on Amazon in both Kindle softcover and hardcover. Depending on when this comes out, the book will actually release on July 12th, but it's available for pre-order right now, and will continue to be up on Amazon all year.
All right. That sounds great. I think that book can really benefit the audience that I have out there, because we've talked about a number of things around grit and leadership. So July 12th is when the book is coming out. Please tell us how my audience can reach you? Tell us about your website, your blog, and some of the services that you offer and how a client can reach you.
Yeah. So over the past several years, I've had the incredible opportunity to work with amazing companies across the United States and in all shapes and forms, from a West Coast startup to a large company in the oil industry to a small manufacturing company in Canada. And each has their strengths and things that they need to work on. And to me, that's been extremely rewarding. And so my company, which is called the Fivecoat Consulting Group, or TFCG, we do executive coaching, keynote speeches, and leadership training. For any of the folks out in the audience, I'd love to see if I can help you and your team at all with what I do, and the ways to reach out and contact me. I'm out on LinkedIn. I cross-post my blog posts on LinkedIn twice a week. So you'll see those on Mondays and Thursdays. My blog is up on my website, which is thefivecoatconsultinggroup.com. And my email is david.fivecoat@thefivecoatconsultinggroup.com. Would love to engage with your audience. Even if I can't help them, I'll direct them to somebody that maybe can. Would love to talk to the folks that follow you on a regular basis and make this such a great podcast.
All right, David, thank you so much. And I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. And I wish the very best to you, and also wish the best for the release of the book and also for your consulting group going forward. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Stephen. I really enjoyed it.
What a great opportunity that was to speak with him. I really appreciate David coming on the podcast. We are all going to have to face adversity and have to lead change, so this is why this discussion was so important. Please go get David's book. I have read it. It's on Amazon, so please check it out. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the Finance Leader podcast. I'm dedicated to helping you grow your leadership, because it is leadership that will set you apart from your peers. You can get this episode wherever you find podcasts. Until next time, you can check out more resources at stephenmclean.com and sign up for my updates so you don't miss an episode of the show. And now, go lead your team, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.